The professor held up Malik's test in front of 300 students and said, "This is what happens when you admit charity cases." Laughter erupted, until Malik stood up trembling, holding a folded letter from the Nobel Committee. The room fell silent, but what he said next wasn't in defense, it was a warning. And someone in the crowd started recording. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The lecture hall buzzed with the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and whispered arrogance. Mahogany chairs lined the rising tiers of the room, filled with crisp blazers, quiet scoffs, and $1,000 wristwatches. At the center of it all stood Malik Griffin, a 20-year-old black physics prodigy from the south side of Chicago. He stood tall, but his knuckles whitened around the edges of his notebook. This wasn't just a classroom, this was Harvard. And here, every breath he took felt like an unspoken challenge. The chalkboard behind Professor Harold Whitmore was scrawled with mathematical notation, a wall of abstraction that most students were content to memorize, not challenge. But Malik had spoken. Carefully, confidently, he'd offered an alternate derivation of the time-energy uncertainty relation, integrating concepts from quantum field theory. Silence had followed. Then came the low, nasal chuckle from Whitmore, the kind of laugh that didn't rise from humor but from superiority. His voice, calm but cutting, filled the room. "Mr. Griffin," Whitmore said, eyes narrowed beneath his silver brows, "I'm afraid you've let your imagination run ahead of your education." The laughter began subtly, a few dry coughs that curved into smirks, then chuckles. By the time the professor turned back toward the board, it had swelled into open mockery. Laughter that didn't just reject Malik's answer, it denied his right to speak in the first place. He felt it like a weight pressing against his ribcage. These weren't just students, they were legacy admits, future senators, CEOs in embryo, and none of them saw Malik as their equal. But he wasn't wrong. Malik had spent months buried in dusty journals, cross-referencing physicists, whose names had been footnotes in most textbooks. He hadn't guessed, he had proven. But proof didn't matter when prejudice wore a tweed blazer and held a peak. His jaw tightened. He felt his ears burn, his heart pound behind his sternum like it wanted to escape. His eyes scanned the room. Not one face showed surprise at the professor's dismissal. No one came to his defense. His peers didn't have to speak to agree. Their silence was fluent. Whitmore returned to the podium, dusting imaginary chalk from his hands like he'd just cleaned up a mess. "Now then, let's continue with today's topic," he said, as if Malik had never spoken at all. Malik's feet stayed rooted to the floor. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with invisible rules no one had told him about, the kind that said brilliance wasn't enough unless it came wrapped in white skin and old money. He could sit down, he could stay quiet. Or he cleared his throat. A few heads turned. "I'd like to ask," Malik said, his voice calm but sharp. "If being incorrect earns laughter here, what happens when you're wrong, Professor?" The room went silent again. Not the stunned hush from earlier, but something sharper. The words didn't rise in volume, but their weight landed hard. Whitmore turned slowly, lips pursed. Malik walked forward, not arrogantly, purposefully. Each step rang out against the marble like a slow drumbeat. He pointed gently toward the equation, still scribbled on the board. "The assumption you made here, about the commutation of the operators, it only holds under the Schrödinger picture. I used the Heisenberg formulation. It's not imagination, it's mathematics." Whitmore's fingers tightened around the chalk. His eyes flickered for just a second. "Doubt? No, pride. Pride too old to bend. This is not a debate hall, Mr. Griffin. Let's not waste class time." "But we just did," Malik interrupted. His tone wasn't disrespectful. It was precise, like every word had been weighed and measured before being spoken. 5 minutes laughing at a correct derivation. That's not education. That's ego. It didn't take long. Phones emerged from pockets. A few students, sensing the tide shift, began recording discreetly. The professor's smirk faltered. Malik wasn't finished. "Some of us don't come from prep schools or private tutors," he continued, eyes scanning the audience now. "Some of us read at bus stops, memorized equations during shift breaks. If you think being black and brilliant is funny, I can show you a formula that'll shut that down." He pulled a folded paper from his bag. His notes, carefully handwritten, full of dense calculations, diagrams, even footnotes referencing obscure papers. He placed them on the desk beside Whitmore. "I triple-checked it," he said. "Maybe you should too." For a moment, no one moved. Whitmore looked at the paper like it might catch fire. The silence had changed flavor now. No longer amused, but uncertain. Some students leaned forward, some looked away, uncomfortable. Then, without another word, Malik turned, walked back to his seat, and sat down. His face was calm, but his hands trembled beneath the desk. He didn't need validation. He needed silence. And he'd finally earned it. The professor didn't speak for almost a minute. He picked up the paper, stared at it, then slowly set it aside. "Class dismissed," he muttered, walking briskly toward the side door. But the damage was done. Phones were still recording, eyes still watching, and one student, a quiet girl in the back row, uploaded the video within seconds. What happened in that classroom was about to become much bigger than Harvard. But Malik didn't know that yet. As he gathered his books, a soft vibration buzzed in his pocket. A new email notification. The subject line read, "For your submission, Nobel Physics Committee requesting clarification." Malik Griffin did not walk out of that lecture hall feeling victorious. He walked out feeling the cold Harvard air brushed against his face as students streamed past him. Some whispering, some staring, some pretending he didn't exist at all. The email from the Nobel Physics Committee sat unopened in his pocket like a live wire. He didn't dare touch it yet, because for Malik, moments of promise had always been followed by punishment. Hope in his life was something that demanded payment. Long before Harvard's stone walls ever cast their shadow over him, Malik had learned that brilliance did not protect black boys. It painted targets on them. He grew up on the south side of Chicago, in a narrow apartment where the walls sweated in the summer, and the radiators screamed through winter nights. The building smelled of old carpet and desperation. Roaches scattered when the lights came on. Sirens replaced lullabies. Malik learned early how to read the mood of a block, how to walk with his head down and his thoughts up. His mother, Denise Griffin, worked 2 jobs, hospital laundry by day, grocery store nights. She came home exhausted, fingers cracked raw, back bent forward not by age but by survival. She never spoke about dreams. She spoke about rent. Malik learned numbers, because numbers were honest. They didn't flinch when he walked into a room. They didn't lower expectations, or raise suspicion. When he was 10, he found an abandoned public library 3 blocks from his building. Its windows cracked, its doors barely hanging on. Inside, dusty shelves held old textbooks no one wanted. Malik did. He carried them home in grocery bags, read them by flashlight when the electricity was cut. His mother didn't understand the symbols, but she understood the hunger in his eyes. When he asked for a calculator, she skipped meals. When he needed graph paper, she borrowed money she couldn't afford to repay. Teachers called him gifted, but their praise always came with warnings. Don't talk too much. Don't make others uncomfortable. Don't forget where you come from. By high school, Malik was winning competitions no one expected him to enter. When recruiters came, they asked about his attitude before they asked about his grades. When Harvard's acceptance letter arrived, Denise cried quietly at the kitchen table, afraid to celebrate too loudly, as if success might hear and take itself back. Harvard was a different universe. The first thing Malik noticed wasn't the architecture. It was the certainty. Students moved through the campus as if they belonged to the bricks beneath their feet. Their parents' names were etched into buildings. Their confidence was inherited. Malik arrived with 1 suitcase, a scholarship packet, and a voice in his head reminding him that one mistake could send him back home. From the first semester, the message was subtle but relentless. He was asked if he was athletic, if he was on affirmative action, if he needed tutoring. Professors praised his effort more than his results. When he spoke in class, heads turned, not to listen, but to assess. Malik learned to speak less, to be precise, to make every word impossible to dismiss. But Professor Harold Whitmore made dismissal his specialty. Whitmore wasn't loud in his bias. He was surgical. He never raised his voice. He smiled while undermining Malik, framed skepticism as mentorship. He corrected Malik publicly and praised white students privately. He interrupted Malik's explanations, but let others ramble. Over time, Malik realized something dangerous. Whitmore didn't see him as a student. He saw him as an intrusion, a disruption to the natural order of the room. After the lecture hall incident, Malik sat alone on a stone bench near the science quad, watching students laugh and walk past as if nothing seismic had happened. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother appeared. "Everything okay, baby? You sound different today." He stared at the screen for a long moment before typing back, "Just tired." He couldn't explain the exhaustion of always having to prove that his mind wasn't an accident. That night, Malik finally opened the email. The Nobel Committee's message was brief, formal, and devastating in its implication. They acknowledged receipt of an anonymous theoretical submission that demonstrated unprecedented originality. They requested clarification on authorship and methodology. They wanted verification. They wanted to know who he was. Malik closed the laptop slowly, because if the world discovered him too soon, Harvard might destroy him first. The next morning he was summoned to Whitmore's office. The room smelled of leather and old books. Certificates lined the walls like trophies. Whitmore gestured for Malik to sit, folding his hands with practiced calm. He spoke softly, but every word was sharpened. "Yesterday was unfortunate," Whitmore said. "Your behavior put me in a difficult position." Malik met his gaze. "I answered the question." Whitmore smiled thinly. "You challenged authority. That rarely ends well here." There it was. Not concern, not correction. A warning. Whitmore leaned back. "You're talented, Malik. But talent doesn't grant immunity. I'd hate to see your future complicated by misunderstanding." Malik understood the translation perfectly. Stay quiet. Stay grateful. Stay small. As Malik stood to leave, Whitmore added casually, "Oh, and I've been asked to review an anonymous submission circulating among certain academic circles." Brilliant work. Bold. Reckless, even. Malik froze. Whitmore watched him closely, eyes gleaming with something ugly. I wonder who would dare submit such work without proper supervision. The room suddenly felt smaller. Malik walked out knowing something had shifted. The laughter in the lecture hall hadn't been the end. It had been the beginning. Whitmore wasn't embarrassed anymore. He was threatened, and threatened men did not protect students like Malik Griffin. As Malik stepped into the corridor, he didn't see Whitmore pick up the phone, but the words he spoke would soon echo through Harvard's highest offices. "Keep an eye on Griffin. I don't want surprises." From that day forward, Malik Griffin felt like every classroom door at Harvard closed a fraction tighter behind him. The campus remained beautiful, manicured, almost smug in its permanence. But his experience inside it had shifted. Professor Harold Whitmore no longer pretended neutrality. The thin academic mask had slipped, revealing something far more personal underneath. Malik was no longer just a student in Whitmore's class. He was an interruption, a challenge, a living contradiction to the story Whitmore had told himself for decades about who brilliance belonged to. Whitmore's scrutiny became constant, methodical, suffocating. Every lecture turned into a silent duel. Malik could feel the professor's eyes on him before he even raised his hand, as if Whitmore anticipated the audacity. When Malik spoke, Whitmore interrupted before the idea could fully form, slicing explanations into fragments and declaring them incomplete. When other students echoed Malik's earlier points minutes later, Whitmore nodded approvingly, expanding on their words, as if they were original revelations. The room absorbed the lesson quickly. Malik's intelligence was tolerable only when filtered through someone else's mouth. The cruelty was never loud. That was the most dangerous part. Whitmore framed everything as pedagogy, as rigor, as the standard Harvard demanded. Precision matters, he would say, glancing pointedly at Malik. Sloppiness is a luxury we cannot afford. Each remark landed with plausible deniability, but Malik felt the cumulative weight of them pressing into his chest. He stopped volunteering answers, not because he doubted himself, but because he understood the trap. Every contribution came with risk. Every equation could be twisted into evidence against him. Still, Whitmore found ways to corner him. During one seminar, Malik was asked to solve a complex problem on the board. One Whitmore knew had an ambiguous assumption buried deep inside it. Malik hesitated for half a second, recalibrating, then proceeded carefully, outlining his logic step by step. Before he could finish, Whitmore cleared his throat loudly. "You see," Whitmore said to the class, "this is what happens when enthusiasm outruns mastery." A few students shifted uncomfortably. No one laughed this time, but no one spoke either. Malik felt the familiar heat rise in his face, not embarrassment, but anger sharpened by restraint. He finished the problem anyway, quietly, accurately, then returned to his seat without looking up. Whitmore didn't acknowledge the correct solution. He simply erased the board. After class, a white student approached Malik, hesitantly, lowering his voice as if truth itself were contraband. "For what it's worth," he said, "you were right. He just doesn't like being challenged." Malik nodded. He'd already learned that lesson. The realization didn't comfort him. It terrified him. Because professors like Whitmore didn't just grade papers. They wrote recommendations. They sat on committees. They shaped futures with a pen stroke and a phone call. And Whitmore was already making his move. Emails Malik sent asking for clarification went unanswered. Research opportunities he applied for vanished without explanation. His name quietly disappeared from a collaborative project he had helped conceptualize. When Malik finally confronted Whitmore during office hours, the professor responded with a smile so practiced it felt rehearsed. "You're talented," Malik Whitmore said, steepling his fingers. "But talent isn't everything. Fit matters. Perception matters. You must learn how to exist within institutions without constantly pressing against them." Malik heard the subtext clearly. Know your place. What Whitmore didn't know, what Malik never revealed, was that Malik had stopped needing him weeks ago. Late at night while Harvard slept, Malik worked alone in the corners of the physics building, chasing an idea that refused to let him rest. He had stumbled onto a theoretical inconsistency buried in decades-old literature. Something dismissed too quickly, something Whitmore himself had once published around without resolving. Malik didn't approach it with arrogance. He approached it with reverence. He read everything. He tested every assumption, and slowly, impossibly, the pieces aligned. The breakthrough terrified him, because Malik understood the rules of the world he lived in. A black undergraduate rewriting established theory wasn't just unlikely, it was unwelcome. So he did the only thing that felt safe. He submitted the paper anonymously, stripping away identifiers, letting the work stand naked and alone. He told no one, not his classmates, not his mother, not even himself, fully. He treated it like a secret he didn't deserve yet. Whitmore, however, sensed something. The professor's demeanor shifted again, not dismissive now but watchful. He asked questions that circled too close to Malik's private work. He referenced obscure concepts Malik had been exploring in isolation. One afternoon, Whitmore paused mid-lecture and looked directly at him. "Some people," he said evenly, "mistake novelty for insight. Academia has little patience for that kind of arrogance." The words were measured, but Malik felt their intent like a blade against his throat. He realized then that Whitmore wasn't just trying to humiliate him anymore. He was trying to flush him out. That night, Malik sat alone in his dorm room, lights off, laptop glowing faintly. The walls felt thin. Every sound in the hallway made him tense. He checked his email compulsively, half expecting another warning, another door quietly closing. Instead, something else appeared. The sender was unfamiliar. No university domain, no signature. The subject line stopped his breath entirely. "We know who you are." Malik stared at the screen, heart hammering, fingers hovering uselessly above the keyboard. Slowly, he opened the message. It was short, precise, terrifying. "We reviewed your submission. The work is extraordinary, but anonymity will no longer protect you. Others are asking questions. Choose carefully what you do next." At the bottom was a single line. "On behalf of the committee." Malik leaned back, pulse roaring in his ears. This wasn't Whitmore. This wasn't Harvard. This was bigger. And for the first time since stepping into Whitmore's classroom, Malik understood the real danger wasn't being silenced anymore. It was being heard. As Malik closed his laptop, another notification appeared. This one from Harvard administration, requesting his immediate presence the following morning, with Professor Whitmore copied on the email. The morning summons from Harvard's administration sat like a weight in Malik Griffin's chest, but he refused to be rattled. After a sleepless night haunted by that cryptic message, "We know who you are," Malik walked across campus as if each step was deliberate resistance. The air was colder than usual, the wind biting, but he didn't flinch. If Whitmore had escalated his game, then Malik had already gone deeper into his secret project had begun in a corner of Widener Library, in the dim back aisles where forgotten journals lived. He hadn't been looking for anything in particular, just chasing distractions from the war brewing in Whitmore's classroom. That's when he found it. A brittle mathematics journal dated 1984, its spine cracked and title half faded. One paper inside, written by an obscure physicist long since passed, caught his eye. The language was dense, the notation outdated, but the core idea pulsed with something electric, a hypothetical symmetry within non-commutative fields that had been dismissed decades earlier as unprovable. Malik recognized the name of the peer reviewer, who had annotated the margin with that word, H. Whitmore. He turned the page slowly, hands trembling with an emotion he couldn't name. It wasn't excitement, it was recognition. The kind of recognition that only came when two separate parts of a puzzle, separated by time, race, and reputation, finally clicked. This wasn't just a dead theory, it was unfinished. Over the next few weeks, Malik disappeared into that world. While his classmates partied and his professors quietly doubted him, he poured himself into the equations. Line by line, he translated old mathematical language into modern expression, corrected inconsistencies, stripped away assumptions that had gone unquestioned for years. He didn't sleep much. He barely ate. It wasn't obsession, it was necessity. He was chasing something no one else had believed in, because no one else had cared enough to try. But Malik cared. He cared in the way only someone could who had lived his whole life, being told not to reach too far. He wasn't trying to prove a point anymore. He was trying to leave proof behind. And then, it happened. 3 weeks after that first discovery, Malik hit the wall of contradiction. The moment where even the best minds gave up. The equation fractured. Its logic looped back onto itself like a snake eating its tail. It dared him to surrender. Instead, he tried something unorthodox. Not with more advanced computation, but with humility. He returned to first principles. He questioned the question itself, and there, buried beneath decades of misdirection, was the flaw. The equation hadn't failed because it was wrong. It had failed because the question had been incomplete. When Malik corrected it, the symbols rearranged like tumblers in a lock. A solution emerged. Clean, elegant, revolutionary. It didn't just solve the equation. It redefined the relationship between time symmetry and particle instability, suggesting new dimensions of mathematical topology that had implications for theoretical physics far beyond the initial scope. He sat in silence for a long time after that. No shouting, no celebration, just the realization that something permanent had just happened. But he didn't tell anyone, not his roommate, not his classmates, certainly not Whitmore. Malik typed the paper carefully, formatting each page with brutal precision. He stripped his name, removed university identifiers, uploaded the file through a secured academic archive that allowed anonymous peer review. He clicked submit with steady fingers. Then he waited. A week passed, then another. He returned to the same lecture halls, the same snide remarks, the same quiet alienation. But inside, Malik carried a secret too powerful for their doubt to touch. He no longer needed validation, because he built something untouchable. Until it wasn't. 3 days ago, he received that cryptic Nobel Committee message. And now, this morning, he stood outside the administrative building, reading over the summons again. The meeting wasn't disciplinary. It was vague. A clarification request regarding academic activity. Whitmore's name sat at the bottom of the email, copied but silent. That was enough. Malik stepped inside. The receptionist gestured him toward a narrow conference room. 2 faculty chairs already sat behind the table. One belonged to an academic dean, he recognized but had never spoken to. The other, empty, was clearly reserved for Whitmore. The dean smiled thinly. "Mr. Griffin, thank you for coming." Malik nodded, cautious. "We've had inquiries," the dean continued, "about an advanced theoretical submission attributed to an unnamed Harvard affiliate. Due to the attention it's receiving, we need to verify its origin. You wouldn't happen to know anything about this?" Malik didn't blink. "Why would I?" The dean offered a rehearsed laugh. "No need for modesty. The work is brilliant. It would be a milestone for this university if one of our students, especially an undergraduate, authored it." Before Malik could respond, the door opened. Whitmore entered, his expression unreadable. "Sorry I'm late," he said coolly, taking the empty seat. He didn't look at Malik, not directly, but his presence said enough. The whole room shifted. The power dynamic clicked into place. The dean leaned in, suddenly more formal. "Professor Whitmore has also reviewed the paper. He has questions." Whitmore folded his hands. "It resembles something I once attempted years ago. Strikingly so. I simply want to ensure academic integrity is being maintained. No one wants misunderstandings." There it was, framed in velvet, but still a blade, a subtle accusation. Plagiarism. Malik stayed calm. "So what exactly are you suggesting?" Whitmore smiled. "I'm suggesting you provide your notes, your sources, your draft timeline. Transparency benefits everyone." Malik stared at him. He knew what this was. If he handed over his notes, Whitmore would find a way to discredit them, to bury them, to claim guidance, or influence, or worse, to erase Malik entirely, and claim authorship himself. He leaned forward, I'll provide the notes, Malik said, to the committee who requested them. Not to anyone else. The dean frowned. Whitmore's eyes darkened. Malik stood. If we're done here, I have class. Without waiting for permission, he walked out, pulse steady, mind racing. That night, an anonymous physics forum exploded with speculation. Someone had leaked the paper. And inside the comments, one chilling sentence appeared repeatedly. Harvard didn't write this. They just want to own it. By the end of the week, Malik Griffin could barely walk across campus without feeling eyes tracking him from every direction. Something had shifted in the atmosphere around him, not officially, not publicly, but quietly. The kind of shift that happened just before a storm broke open. Professors stopped making eye contact. Classmates offered hollow smiles. Someone had taped a printout of the leaked paper to the common area bulletin board with a sticky note that read that he didn't write it. But Malik no longer flinched at suspicion. He had expected it. What he hadn't expected came quietly, almost humbly, in the form of a thin envelope slipped under his dorm room door late Friday evening. No return address, no fanfare, just a seal embossed in silver, the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences. Malik stood staring at it, heart knocking against his ribs in time with the wind outside. He opened it slowly, hands trembling, the weight of generations suddenly perched on his shoulders. Inside, a single page. Formal, polite, unbelievable. The Nobel Committee had reviewed the anonymous theoretical submission. Their panel of physicists and mathematicians were not just intrigued, they were shaken. In their words, it reshaped the foundational structure of field dynamics in quantum symmetry. They wished to confirm the author's identity. Privately, discreetly, with full confidentiality. They had included a number, a direct line. Malik sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the page, unsure whether to feel pride or fear. This was not how these things happened. Undergraduate students, especially black students, especially from Southside Chicago, especially already under quiet investigation by their own university, did not get invitations like this. But then again, he hadn't followed the path. He had built one. That night, Malik dialed the number. The voice on the other end was calm, precise, British accented, and carried the unmistakable weight of authority. "Mr. Griffin," the man said, as though already certain it was him. "We understand the importance of discretion. We've also seen the attempt to suppress your work." Malik didn't respond immediately. He didn't need to. The silence was its own answer. "You're not the first mind to be overlooked," the man continued. "But few manage to break through on their own. What you've done hasn't been done before." They offered to fly him to Geneva, under the pretense of a private scientific roundtable. No public announcement, no press, just a closed-door discussion among select physicists. They wanted to meet the mind behind the math. It was everything he had ever dreamed of. And yet, Malik paused. He didn't say yes. Not immediately, because something deeper burned beneath the surface of that offer. A truth too raw to ignore. If he accepted without confrontation, Harvard would write its own version of the story. Whitmore would bury his complicity. The institution that tried to silence him would bask in reflected brilliance. And Malik knew how this played out. Black genius praised only when disconnected from its pain, from its fight, from its name. He leaned back into the phone and spoke clearly. "I'll meet them," he said, "but not yet." The line went quiet. "May I ask why?" "Because I have unfinished business," Malik replied. "And the truth doesn't get to hide behind convenience." The next morning, Malik walked into Whitmore's lecture hall unannounced, interrupting a class already in progress. Heads turned. Some students smirked, expecting a repeat of humiliation. Whitmore's jaw tightened, chalk pausing mid-formula. "I have something to share," Malik said, stepping toward the board. Whitmore opened his mouth, but Malik cut him off. "This will only take a moment." He moved to the chalkboard, and with steady hands rewrote the equation Whitmore had failed to solve 2 semesters earlier. The same equation buried in the old journal. The one that had now echoed all the way to Stockholm. As the final symbol landed, Malik turned back to the class. "That," he said, "is the solution. Proven, verified, and published." He paused, then added, "You're welcome to check the time-stamped submission. It's public now." Whitmore stood frozen. The students watched in stunned silence. No one laughed. Malik didn't linger. He stepped down from the board, dropped a copy of the leaked paper on Whitmore's desk, and turned to leave. Before he reached the door, Whitmore's voice followed him, lower this time, calculated. "You think this will last?" Malik didn't turn around. I don't need it to last. I just need it to be undeniable. Outside the lecture hall, the hallway was empty, but for the first time, it didn't feel lonely. Later that evening, Malik received a new email. This one was not from Harvard. It was from a journalist at The Atlantic. Subject line: Anonymous genius. The black Harvard student behind the equation they tried to bury. Malik's chest tightened. He hadn't spoken to anyone. Someone else had. Attached to the email was a single line from an unnamed source. Harvard's golden professor tried to erase him once. Not this time. The car idled silently as Malik read the encrypted message. They never intended to let you win, but one of them just broke. The cold from the Geneva night seeped in through the door he hadn't yet closed. Inside the mansion, the lights glowed warmly, a performance of hospitality that masked a room filled with old power, tight smiles, and sharper agendas. The dinner had felt like diplomacy, but Malik knew what it really was. It was a loyalty test, and he had failed beautifully. He sank into the leather seat, mind still reeling from the layered conversations that had unfolded just minutes ago. The men at that table weren't just committee members. They were gatekeepers of legacy. Their reputations weren't built on discovery alone, but on control. Control over who gets seen, who gets published, and who gets crowned genius. Malik wasn't just a disruption to their norms, he was a breach in the structure. They had smiled over their wine glasses, eyes gleaming beneath chandelier light, but every toast they raised was hollow. From the moment Malik had arrived, the questions had been carefully disguised as curiosity. Tell us more about how you arrived at such conclusions. Who reviewed your draft before submission? Surely someone advised you. It's quite advanced. Their tone was smooth, almost complimentary, but Malik recognized the dance. What they were really asking was who helped you? Who gave you permission? Whose shoulders did you steal from? He answered each question calmly, refusing to dignify their innuendos with outrage. His work had been solitary, rigorous, and independently reviewed. He didn't owe them mentorship stories or confessions of guidance that didn't exist. But the more confidently he spoke, the colder the air became. The laughter at the table dimmed, the smiles stiffened. They were used to prodigies asking for approval, not declaring arrival. Then the tone shifted. A German physicist, whose name was often listed beside groundbreaking research in quantum fields, leaned back and asked the question that punctured the illusion completely. Do you understand, he said gently, swirling his wine, why awarding a student of background, under these conditions, could risk politicizing the committee? Malik didn't flinch. You mean a black student, he replied evenly. The man didn't correct him. They'll say it was activism, another added, tone neutral but loaded. That we bowed to pressure, not science. Malik exhaled slowly. Or maybe they'll say you finally recognized brilliance, where it's always existed, but you were too blind to see it before. No one raised their glass after that. They moved on, pretending to savor the next course. But their silence spoke louder than any toast. It was as if Malik had broken a rule he wasn't supposed to know existed. That wasn't new to him. Being in rooms where his intellect was tolerated, but never embraced, had always been part of the price. But this was different. They weren't questioning his work. They were questioning his right to have done it alone. And then he flipped the script. Malik leaned forward, his voice steady, his tone surgical. I'd like to ask a question myself. The table paused. He pulled out a small folded page, one of his earliest drafts, dated with preliminary equations scribbled in the margins. This particular string simplification here, he said, pointing to a specific line, was considered too abstract in my original model. I left it out of the final submission. The British physicist seated 2 seats away stiffened. Malik's gaze didn't move. Funny though. It appeared word for word. Same variable set in a white paper published 2 weeks ago, by you. The room fell utterly still. The man blinked once. I don't. You do. Malik cut him off gently. The timestamp on the archive doesn't lie, and neither do the math symbols you forgot to reformat. The silence deepened. The man's hands tightened around his glass. He didn't speak again. The others shifted uncomfortably, some exchanging glances, others pretending to be fascinated by the centerpiece candles. It was the moment the dinner cracked. They had invited Malik to probe him, but he had walked in prepared to defend more than just his work. He'd come ready to reveal theirs. Malik didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply folded the paper and slid it back into his coat. Next time you question my authorship, he said quietly, make sure your own house is in order. None of them responded. He stood, thanked them for the evening, and walked out without looking back. But the damage was done. Not to Malik. To them. As the car pulled away, Malik's phone lit up with a notification. An anonymous upload to a secure server had just gone public. The leaked document, a confession, an internal memo signed by a Nobel panelist. We must delay Griffin's consideration. The optics are too dangerous. Wait until the storm passes. The leak detonated like a bomb. In the quiet early hours of the morning, as most of the academic world slept, an encrypted link began to circulate among journalists, activists, and scholars. Its title was simple: Deliberate Delay, Internal Memo, Nobel Panel. But the contents were anything but simple. The document confirmed what many had suspected, but few dared to believe. A Nobel panelist had not only admitted to discussing Malik Griffin's case behind closed doors, but had actively recommended delaying his consideration. Not for lack of merit, but for fear of optics. We must delay Griffin's consideration. The optics are too dangerous. Wait until the storm passes. Within hours, the story broke through the walls of academic discourse and into the bloodstream of a divided nation. Malik Griffin was no longer just a physics prodigy. He had become a symbol. On social media, the hashtag #JungLetBrillianceRise caught fire. Black intellectuals from Ivy League campuses to community colleges posted their own stories of erasure papers denied, awards postponed, contributions overlooked. Prominent civil rights leaders issued statements condemning the Nobel Committee's complicity. Even retired NASA engineers, Nobel laureates of color, and once silent black professors who had survived decades in elite institutions began to speak. This is not about one student, they wrote. It's about centuries of stolen moments and silenced minds. Protests erupted across college campuses, from Howard to Yale. Students marched with signs reading, "Math has no color, but power does," and Malik Griffin solved the equation, but you couldn't solve your racism. Harvard's administration, already under fire for its handling of Whitmore, now faced nationwide scrutiny. Every press release they issued felt too late, too vague, too careful, and the more they avoided naming the problem, the louder the country named it for them. But with the wave of support came the inevitable pushback. White supremacist forums branded Malik a fraud. Fringe outlets spun conspiracy theories, claiming his work was planted, or that the leak of the memo was orchestrated by diversity extremists. Comment sections became battlegrounds. Anonymous threats flooded Malik's inbox. One email simply read, "You'll never be more than a diversity headline." Conservative media doubled down. Affirmative action physics, one outlet called it. Pundits on primetime television debated not Malik's theorem, but his tone, his lack of humility, his politicization of science. They claimed he was disrespecting tradition and dividing academia. They brought up the high school suspension again, turning it into a cautionary tale. This is what happens when we lower standards for inclusion. Malik watched all of it unfold, like a slow-motion collision. He barely slept. Each morning brought another wave of commentary. Another barrage of messages trying to tell him what his story was, what it wasn't, who he represented, and who he didn't. His name trended alongside words like radical, revolution, fraud, and genius. There was no middle ground, no space for nuance. In America, especially in public, you were either a symbol to protect or a threat to erase. He sat alone in his dorm. One evening, laptop open but untouched. Fingers curled into his sweatshirt sleeves. The noise outside felt deafening even through walls. Students chanted in the quad, voices echoing through the old Harvard bricks that had held centuries of silence. He wasn't sure what scared him more, that he had become a rallying cry, or that he hadn't asked for any of it. His mother called. She had been watching the news all day, flipping between MSNBC and Fox, her voice strained but soft. "Baby," she said, "I don't know if the world's proud of you or scared of you." He didn't answer right away. "I think it depends who you ask," he finally said. She exhaled. "Well, just don't let them write this story without you." But Malik knew they already were. He had become more than himself. More than a student. More than a theorem. He had become the question: what happens when a black mind goes too far for the comfort of the powerful? The country was answering that question in real time, and the answers weren't just on news channels. They were in protests, in editorials, in hallways, and behind closed doors of institutions built on legacy, not justice. And then something happened that no one saw coming. Just before midnight, Malik's phone lit up with a flood of notifications, tweets, mentions, Headlines. He opened Twitter and froze. The official White House account had tweeted. A simple message, no fluff, no sidestepping. Brilliance doesn't need permission to exist. We see you, Malik Griffin. The retweet count exploded instantly. No explanation, no photo, just words. But in a nation where silence was often used to maintain power, that sentence echoed louder than any speech. 10 minutes later, Malik received a second tweet reply from a locked verified account belonging to a former Nobel laureate. It read, "It's time you knew what really happened the last time a black man got this close to winning." The tweet was short, just 8 words, but those 8 words ignited a reaction. The world couldn't contain, genius knows no color. We stand with Malik Griffin. It wasn't tagged, it didn't come with a photo. No apology, no qualifiers, but it came from the official account of the President of the United States. That alone was enough to flip the country on its head. In an era where statements are often buried in press briefings and diluted through layers of advisors, this one was raw, public, and unmistakably personal. It was a side being taken, a line being drawn, in history's sand. Malik Griffin was no longer just a name trending online. He had become a national marker of intellect, of resistance, of the uncomfortable truth that the world wasn't built to handle black genius when it doesn't ask permission. The internet collapsed into chaos. News channels dropped their programming to dissect the meaning behind the president's words. Supporters erupted in celebration, while critics accused the administration of caving to radical activism. Commentators clashed across split screens, debating whether the statement undermined the Nobel Committee's independence or represented a long overdue course correction. One thing was undeniable: silence was no longer an option. Harvard scrambled to issue a revised statement that sounded more urgent, more apologetic. They used words like reaffirming equity and rebuilding trust, but the public had already seen too much. Malik watched the storm unfold from a corner seat in the Winder Library, surrounded by the ghosts of Harvard's past, portraits of white founders and scholars whose names lined buildings. His phone buzzed with each mention, each headline, each surge in his following. But the tweet itself, that line, those words, they hit something deeper. Because for so long, his excellence had been treated as an anomaly, as a contradiction, and now, for the first time, it was being recognized without apology. But power, especially white institutional power, never responds without recalibration. Hours after the tweet went viral, the Nobel Committee issued an urgent press release. A press conference had been scheduled to deliver a final decision. No details, no name, just a time, a place, and a message that something irreversible was about to happen. Inside Nobel headquarters, the tension rose to a boil. Committee members, some furious, others flustered, argued behind closed doors. "We cannot appear politically swayed," one declared. Another responded coldly, "The science was always sound. The doubt came from us, not him." A leaked audio clip later revealed one panelist whispering, "We delayed him because we feared the storm. Now we're the storm." Meanwhile, across the US, support exploded into action. Black educators shared Malik's work in classrooms. Civil rights organizations demanded transparency. Hashtags like "Let Brilliance Rise" and "Genius Needs No Gatekeepers" trended globally. But the vitriol grew equally aggressive. Anonymous accounts flooded social platforms with doctored documents, conspiracy theories, and racially charged hate. One commentator labeled Malik a symbol of leftist decay. Others mocked the president's tweet as political theater. Malik received no shortage of threats. Emails with slurs, voicemails filled with venom. But he had stopped fearing noise. The hate was expected. What still felt surreal was the love. The messages from children who saw themselves in him, from elderly black professors who said they finally felt vindicated. He read one message again and again: "You're the student we never got to be." That night he called his mother. Her voice cracked before she could speak. "They said your name," she whispered. "On the news. On everything. Even the president said it." "I saw," Malik said quietly. There was a long pause. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "Neither do I," he replied. "But I know I'm not running." At Harvard, the tribunal into Whitmore's conduct quietly concluded. Though sealed, sources leaked word that the findings were damning. Still, no disciplinary action was announced. But the silence spoke volumes. Whitmore hadn't taught a class in days. His office remained dark. His name, once protected by legacy, now carried the chill of scandal. Yet Malik knew better than to believe any system would clean itself voluntarily. Accountability was always negotiated, fought for, sometimes forced. Then, just before midnight, Malik's phone lit up with a single encrypted message. The decision has been finalized. No name, no context. Just that. He sat in the dim glow of his dorm room, heart still, breath thin. He had known this moment would come. But knowing didn't make it less surreal. The journey that started in a forgotten Chicago library, in roach-infested apartments, and secondhand textbooks, was now arriving at the gates of history. Somewhere in Stockholm, the Nobel Committee was about to speak. And when they did, the name they chose would not just be an announcement, it would be a declaration. The world braced. The next morning, the livestream began. Cameras flashed. Reporters filled the room, jostling for space. The chair of the Nobel Committee stepped to the podium, his expression unreadable. He straightened his notes, cleared his throat. Malik watched from his dorm, alone. Across campuses, households, city squares, and social timelines, millions tuned in. The chair raised his eyes to the audience. After extensive deliberation, he began. The Nobel Committee has reached its final decision. Malik's phone vibrated again. Another message. This time from a verified private account. An elderly black Nobel laureate long retired from public life. It read, "No matter what name they say, you already won. But you need to know what happened to the last one they tried to bury." Malik's gaze snapped back to the screen. The chair inhaled. He opened his mouth, but just as the first syllable left his lips, the live stream cut to black. The moment the Nobel Committee chair stepped to the podium, the air in the hall felt thicker than the weight of history itself. Cameras rolled, reporters leaned forward in their seats, and millions around the world held their breath as if waiting for a verdict, not just on a scientific theory, but on something far larger, on truth, on justice, on the long-buried promise that excellence could rise even from the margin. The chair cleared his throat, eyes sweeping across the expectant faces, faces of dignitaries and scholars who had spent decades building careers within systems that had never intended to include someone like Malik Griffin. And then in a measured, steady voice that carried across the silent room, those words came, words that would reverberate far beyond the polished walls of that press conference. After exhaustive deliberation, the Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Prize in Physics to Malik Griffin. The room didn't erupt with applause. Instead, it broke open with gasps, sharp, collective intakes of disbelief that felt like the racking exhale of centuries. Reporters sitting with poised pens froze mid-stroke, not because they doubted what they'd heard, but because they hadn't expected it. A black undergraduate, a young man whose intellect had been mocked, and his legitimacy questioned, now standing as the most celebrated physicist in the world. No one in that room had ever witnessed anything like it. Cameras blinked, lenses refocused, and across streaming broadcasts shared in real time, faces in living rooms, classrooms, and offices around the world registered the same stunned expression. Malik himself didn't move at first. He sat with a stillness that wasn't calm, at least not the peace of triumph, but the quietude that follows when disbelief starts to settle into reality. The announcements he had heard before, scholarships, grants, acknowledgements, had never shaken the world this way. This was different. This was history itself cracking open. His breath didn't shake. His heart didn't roar. Instead, there was a slow, deep influx of something he hadn't felt since the earliest days of struggle. The sense that a door had not just been opened, but forced ajar by raw, unyielding truth. Reporters turned to their microphones, and suddenly the sound exploded into the air. Split screens, panel debates, live commentary hyperventilating with astonishment and interpretation. Social media lit up like wildfire. The hashtag Malik Griffin Nobel trended worldwide within minutes. Students across continents watched with wide eyes. People in cafes muted the news, stunned into silence. Others stood up and began applauding spontaneously, as if their own hands could finish the sentence the world had only just begun. When Malik finally stood, it wasn't with theatrical flourish or the exaggerated joy of someone vindicated. It was the calm, quiet step of someone who had known all along that truth could not remain hidden forever, even in a world built to suppress it. His walk to the stage was methodical, each footfall echoing like a testament to all the nights he stayed up studying in libraries where no one thought to look for him. Faces turned, some with respect, others with disbelief still lingering at the edges. But he walked on, not into applause but into acknowledgement. At the podium, Malik Griffin didn't reach for the medal first. He didn't stroke it, display it, or touch it like a token. Instead, he looked out at the sea of cameras and faces, large and small screens, reflecting a moment that no one would forget. His eyes held something deep and unwavering, neither arrogance nor humility, but the weight of someone who had carried truth through long shadows. "I am honored beyond words," he began, voice measured, rich with layers of emotion that had been honed through months of controversy, doubt, and resistance. "But I accept this not as a conclusion, but as a continuation of inquiry, of courage, and of truth." There were no grandiose declarations in his speech, no empty platitudes about overcoming adversity. What Malik offered was sincerity wrapped in precision, acknowledgement of struggle, recognition of the voices that had supported him, and a steadfast refusal to let this moment become merely symbolic. He reminded the world that the road to this recognition was paved with resistance, not just from a professor who once laughed at him, but from institutions and histories that had never presumed to place someone like him at the pinnacle of intellectual achievement. Every word was deliberate, layered with the gravity of someone who had lived legacy and survival before arriving at triumph. But as the broadcast cameras panned across international studio audiences and into living rooms around the globe, an undercurrent rippled beneath the applause and bewildered praise. It was almost inaudible at first, like a low hum beneath a storm, but it grew with each second that passed. Not everyone was celebrating. Some voices, muted at first, began to weave their skepticism into the narrative, not because they questioned the validity of Malik's achievement, but because his presence in that moment exposed a fault line. No one wanted to acknowledge the uneasy truth that systems built to recognize brilliance had nothing prepared for a claimant who had never fit their mold. After the ceremony, when the official television cameras were packed away and the flashes softened into still photographs, Malik stepped off stage into a reception hall thick with polite congratulations. Diplomats offered civil nods. Nobel laureates extended handshakes weighed with the bittersweetness of history being remade. Some spoke with genuine admiration. Others spoke with carefully measured words that felt unwilling to disrupt the narrative they'd grown comfortable with. It was there, among the polite clinking of crystal glasses and the quiet hum of compliments, that the deeper layers of impact began settling around him, like a chill that no spotlight could outshine. In the corner of that reception, a veteran physicist approached Malik. She was older, her face lined with the kind of wisdom that comes from decades inside academia's rarefied halls. She didn't congratulate him with a hug or a handshake. Instead, she spoke with a solemn intensity. "Malik," she said, voice low, eyes not turning away, "what you've done is beyond exceptional. But this moment, your moment, has revealed something larger than any of us understood before." Malik paused, already attentive, sensing the gravity beneath her words. She continued, her gaze relentless. "There are histories, hey? Quiet histories of those who were pushed aside. Then there are secrets, stories we never talk about. Your win has not just uncovered brilliance, it's revealed fissures in the foundation." Her words didn't carry fear. They carried concern, rooted in a lifetime of having witnessed how truth changes those who hold it. "What do you mean?" Malik asked, curiosity mixed with weariness. He had expected reaction, debate, even backlash, but not this undercurrent of something darker stirring behind the scenes. "There are files that should have remained locked," she whispered, "cases that weren't buried. They were erased. Some that affected more than one life. Your announcement hasn't just rewritten history, it's reopened old chapters that those who believed themselves untouchable would rather stay closed." Malik didn't yet know the specifics. He only felt the tremor of something immense shifting beneath the surface of his victory. He stepped outside onto a terrace, overlooking the Swedish winter night. The sky was a deep indigo, stars sharp against the cold air, as if the universe itself bore witness to what had just transpired. In that quiet, distant place, it felt almost poetic, yet beneath the serenity was a current of charged tension he couldn't ignore. His phone vibrated, a single notification, unknown number, one message. "You should know something before tomorrow. The history this win has uncovered wasn't meant to be revealed." Malik stared at the screen, breath catching. A chill swept through the terrace air, not of cold, but of anticipation. He didn't recognize the number, but the implication was clear. This moment was more than an award. It was a rupture in silence. Before he could process the weight of the message, another alert appeared, an attached file. Its name alone made his heartbeat spike. Andrei Colston. Confidential file. Malik froze. The name belonged to someone he had barely dared to remember, once a promising black physicist whose own career had been derailed. whose absence had whispered through academic rumors for years, someone whose fate had been quietly erased from the histories whispered in hallways and dismissed in academic circles. And now that file was waiting for him. Open. Malik hesitated for only a second before tapping the file icon, but the title of the first line made his blood run cold. Falsified evidence. Case suppressed. Whitmore's hand confirmed. The screen went dark, and Malik's world shifted again. Malik Griffin left that Swedish night transformed. The weight of the Nobel medal around his neck was heavy. Not because of its metal, but because of what it now represented. A rupture in centuries of assumed brilliance. A fracture no institution could deny. But symbols, as powerful as they are, carry a cost. His victory wasn't just a personal elevation. It was a beacon, a challenge, a warning sent rippling through systems built to resist disruption. And when you become a symbol, you also become a target. By the time Malik stepped back onto American soil, the world couldn't stop talking about him. The president's tweets still resonated in headlines. The leaked files about historical suppression were still topics on major network roundtables, and protest movements had adopted his name as a rallying cry. But amidst the celebration, the resistance sharpened. Not every reaction was applause. Some of it was fear, and fear, when powerful, always seeks to claw back control. Within days, Malik's inbox overflowed with threats, both explicit and implicit. Emails with menacing subject lines appeared at odd hours. Anonymous voicemails filled with veiled warnings arrived on his phone. One message simply said, "We allowed you this moment. Don't mistake this for permission." Another threatened legal action, claiming he had stained the reputation of esteemed institutions. The very systems that once ignored him now recoiled at his visibility. At first the threats rattled him. Not because they were unexpected, but because they were proof. Proof that brilliance unshielded by approval was unsettling to people who depended on approval to exist. Malik had always known his ascent wouldn't be linear. But the hostility wasn't just academic. It was personal. It was cultural. It was historical. This wasn't a reckoning. It was resistance. Amidst the chaos of acclaim and backlash, offers flooded in, prestigious fellowships, invitations to lecture at top universities, job proposals from private research labs, promising financial security and freedom. Some were genuine attempts to bring him into respected circles. Others were thinly veiled efforts to redirect his trajectory, to channel his brilliance into spaces where it could be managed. They spoke of opportunity, of platforms, of doors opening. But Malik saw them for what they often were, attempts to contain him. One particularly alluring offer came from a world-renowned research institute in Europe, promising him a senior fellowship, a generous salary, and immediate access to cutting-edge resources. On paper it was a dream. In reality, it felt like a gilded cage. The letter was diplomatic, polite, but the subtext was clear. Come here, leave the narrative behind, leave the fight behind. When Malik declined, he did so quietly, without fanfare, but with conviction. He didn't want empty prestige. He wanted change. And change, as he began to understand, was never comfortable. The betrayal came from a place he least expected, some of his closest academic allies. A faculty mentor who'd once encouraged him to push boundaries, suddenly avoided his calls. A researcher who praised his work at a conference later, implied that his success was due more to media spectacle than scientific merit. Even among students there were fractures, some inspired by him, others resentful, convinced he had received undue attention for reasons beyond his control. The fissures weren't always overtly racist, but they were unmistakably tied to expectations about who brilliance should look like. Still, there were wins. Teachers told students about his story. Science departments invited him to discuss the politics of recognition. Young black scholars wrote to him, saying his Nobel Act felt like validation, like permission to dream without apology. In classrooms, his image began appearing on posters alongside Ada Lovelace, Marie Curie, and Richard Feynman. For the first time, students who had been told they didn't belong could point to someone who looked like them and say, "I could be next." Malik's calm resilience wasn't born of naivety. It was crafted from years of silent strength, months of being dismissed in lecture halls, years of proving his mind in the absence of acknowledgement, and decades of living in a world that tried to assess him before allowing him to breathe. He understood that brilliance without impact changes nothing. Recognition was not the end game. Representation was. And so he kept speaking, not just about physics, but about access, equity, and the pain of exclusion. But with visibility came a new level of scrutiny. Public, relentless, and unforgiving. Every paper he published was dissected in media columns. Every lecture he gave was reviewed through social lenses before scientific ones. In academic journals, polite critiques masked deeper discomfort. Lines like a bold but uncertain theoretical leap were often code for something else. He wasn't supposed to be here. His personal life became public property. Reporters cornered his friends. Bloggers speculated about his relationships, his motivations, even his authenticity. Facebook threads debated the real reason for his success. Some suggested affirmative action had played a role. Others claimed he was a symptom of a culture that valued representation over rigor. Each iteration of skepticism carried a familiar undertone, not a question of his work, but of his worthiness. One night, after a particularly draining interview in which anchors repeatedly questioned whether his race had made his accomplishments politically palatable, Malik sat with his mother in a quiet hotel room. The conversation, which began lightly, soon turned inwards. "You carry so much on your shoulders," she said gently, eyes reflecting both pride and concern. "Not just your story. Everyone's story." Malik didn't flinch. "I didn't ask to be the face of any movement," he replied softly, "but I can't ignore what this moment means to others." She reached for his hand. "Just remember, your value isn't measured by how loudly the world argues about you." He nodded, absorbing her words as though they were armor. The doors he opened were real. They were massive, luminous portals into possibility, but they also revealed what lay dormant behind them. The fear that brilliance without lineage, without precedent, without conformity could unravel the very systems that had once protected mediocrity behind tradition. Harvard, in particular, had a complex relationship with Malik's rise. The university's silence had been shattered by international scrutiny, internal pressure, and the specter of its own historical contradictions. Freshmen whispered his name in hallways. Faculty committees debated curriculum changes, inspired by his work. But beneath the polite curriculum talks was a deeper tension. Questions of legacy, guilt, and institutional identity that Harvard had never been forced to confront so publicly. And then, just when it seemed the pressure might ease, something unexpected happened. On a brisk Monday morning in early winter, a young black student walked into Professor Whitmore's introductory theoretical physics class carrying something unmistakable around their neck: Malik Griffin's Nobel medal. The room quieted instantly, not out of reverence but disbelief. Whitmore, who stood at the front with that same old posture of distant superiority, froze mid-sentence. His chalk paused in the air. Beads of sweat gathered imperceptibly, not from exertion, but from sudden sharp recognition. The medal glittered in the fluorescent lights, bronze and gold, and undeniable. The student didn't speak at first. They simply walked to the front, placed the medal gently on Whitmore's desk, and turned to face the room with a level stare that carried both defiance and demand. A murmur rippled through the class. Whitmore, once unshakable, stood silent. The student, eyes steady, voice poised, finally spoke. "Professor Whitmore," they said, "I'm here because someone once laughed at my intelligence in one of your classes. He was right then. He is right now." A gasp echoed down the rows, not because of confrontation, but because of the inevitability in the words. Everyone in that room understood, in that moment, that the world Malik had carved open was no longer an exception. It was a doorway. And as Whitmore's face went pale with recognition, a notification chimed on the student's phone, an anonymous text that read, "You're not here by accident. We chose you. If you believe brilliance has no color, and that no one should have to prove their worth just to be seen, type yes in the comments." Have you ever witnessed someone's potential be dismissed before they even spoke? Share your story. Don't forget to subscribe, not just for more stories, but to help amplify voices the world tries to silence. Because every story like Malik's brings us one step closer to the justice we all deserve. The envelope from the Nobel Committee stayed tucked deep in Malik Griffin's backpack, unopened, unread, but humming with power. It wasn't that he didn't believe it. He did. He had earned every word printed inside. But for Malik, validation from Stockholm meant little, if the halls that once laughed at him were allowed to pretend none of it happened. That sealed envelope wasn't a trophy. It was a quiet weapon, and he was about to wield it. Crossing Harvard Yard, Malik's steps felt heavier than usual, not with doubt, but with purpose. The sky above was gray, the kind of winter sky that pressed down on buildings, on history. He didn't feel small under it anymore. He passed the same statues, the same ivy-covered walls, the same lecture hall where he'd once stood humiliated under Whitmore's dismissive gaze. But now Malik wasn't carrying fear. He was carrying inside. The classroom was full. Professor Harold Whitmore's voice echoed across the walls as he diagrammed equations on the board. His posture was as commanding as ever, measured, controlled, cloaked in quiet authority. Students scribbled notes, but some noticed Malik walking in and paused. There were no whispers, no smirks this time. The air tightened. Malik didn't sit. He stepped down the aisle, calm and unshaken, until he reached the front row. From his bag, he pulled a single sheet of paper, the same problem Whitmore had humiliated him over months ago. The equation that had once branded him foolish in the eyes of a room full of privilege. Malik held it up with steady hands and looked straight at Whitmore. "I'd like to revisit a mistake," he said, voice cutting through the room with quiet defiance. The professor turned, his chalk pausing in midair. His eyes flicked to Malik, then quickly to the class. "Mr. Griffin, we're in the middle of a lecture," he said, dismissive but clipped. "This won't take long," Malik replied. "It's just a simple problem. You gave it to me once. I solved it correctly. You told the room I was wrong. Turns out I wasn't." Some students straightened in their seats. A few instinctively pulled out their phones. Whitmore held his ground. "This isn't the forum. It's exactly the forum," Malik interrupted. He stepped to the board beside Whitmore and began to write. Not rushed, not flashy, just precise. The same equation. Then beneath it, the revised model, verified, peer-reviewed, the one the Nobel Committee had cited in their letter. He turned to Whitmore. "Where to solve it?" The professor stepped forward. He took the chalk. The room went silent. He hesitated, wrote a few symbols, paused, erased them, tried again. Nothing aligned. Malik's expression didn't change. He didn't gloat. He simply waited, arms crossed, while the man who had spent years crafting a reputation couldn't find his way out of the very problem he had once weaponized against a student. Whitmore finally set the chalk down. "I don't believe this is the place. You don't believe you can solve it," Malik said sharply. "Because you couldn't then, and you still can't now." A ripple passed through the room. Not laughter. Something colder. Recognition. The kind of silence that doesn't recover. Malik took the chalk and finished it himself, fluidly, confidently. No skipped logic. No gaps. Just clarity. When he stepped back from the board, the answer stood undisputed. Complete. "That," he said, looking at the class now, "is the solution. It's public. It's verified. And for the record, this isn't about ego. It's about refusing to stay silent while you're made small." He dropped a copy of the published paper on Whitmore's desk and walked out. No applause. Just wait. Every step toward the door felt like peeling away layers of a false narrative. By that evening, someone had uploaded the video to YouTube. The title was simple but explosive. "Harvard Professor Gets Schooled by His Own Student." It took only hours to erupt across social media. Thousands watched the quiet showdown. Millions. Soon Malik's poise, the cold brilliance of the math, and Whitmore's silence painted a scene too sharp to look away from. But the fallout had only begun. In the comments section, one post kept resurfacing screenshots from internal server logs, showing that someone at Harvard had attempted to delete the anonymous paper from the physics database just days before the leak. The digital trail traced back to one location, Professor Harold Whitmore's office. And now, questions weren't just coming from students. They were coming from journalists, alumni, and donors. The whispers of misconduct had turned into something heavier, something institutional. Behind closed doors, Harvard administrators gathered for an emergency meeting. Their dilemma was clear: either protect the professor who had shaped decades of policy, or finally admit the system had tried to erase a genius it never wanted to acknowledge. And as pressure mounted, Malik received a new message, not from Harvard, not from the press, but from someone far more dangerous. "Stop talking. You've made enough enemies already." The moment the classroom video hit the internet, something irreversible was set in motion. Malik Griffin's face, calm and unbothered as he solved the very equation his professor once mocked, now filled millions of screens. It wasn't just a clip, it was a rupture. The image of a young black man, reclaiming his power silently, intelligently, without raising his voice, was too potent to ignore. People didn't scroll past it. They watched. Then they watched again. And then they shared. By the end of the night, the video had spread across platforms like digital wildfire. Twitter threads dissected every gesture, every word. Reddit's academic forums exploded with debate. TikTok remixes turned Malik's chalk strokes into slow-motion declarations of truth. The video title changed depending on who posted it. Black brilliance in action. Harvard gets schooled. He solved what his professor couldn't. But the message underneath each variation was the same. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Not here. Major outlets seized the story within hours. The Atlantic published a feature titled, "When the Classroom Became a Battlefield: Malik Griffin and the Quiet Revolution." CNN ran a segment analyzing not just the clip, but what it represented: years of suppressed brilliance, finally breaking through the Ivy League's polished surface. NPR interviewed black academics across the country, who admitted they saw their younger selves in Malik's measured tone and sharp resistance. Within a day, Malik's name had become a symbol. But as the admiration grew louder, so did something else. Something colder. A shadow followed the spotlight. On less visible parts of the internet, voices began to question the narrative. Conservative blogs framed the video as a manipulated stunt. Anonymous academic accounts suggested the math was too clean for an undergraduate. The term affirmative action babies started appearing in threads. It didn't matter that Malik's solution was flawless. It didn't matter that his submission had been independently reviewed and praised. For some, the very idea of a young black man outshining a tenured white professor in public was too disruptive to accept. Then came the more insidious attacks. An obscure website published what it called exclusive background on Malik Griffin. It included an old high school incident report. Long sealed, long irrelevant. He had once been suspended after a heated argument with a math teacher who accused him of cheating on an exam he'd actually scored perfectly. The report never proved wrongdoing, but the implication was now repurposed as ammunition. Headlines twisted the narrative. Harvard prodigy, or repeat offender. The pattern behind Malik Griffin. Fox News picked up the story the next morning. A commentator called him the poster child of woke academia, claiming Harvard had set him up as a symbol of inclusion, rather than true achievement. They ran B-roll of the viral video over a voiceover that questioned the legitimacy of Malik's work without challenging the content. It was a spectacle of erasure, one that didn't need proof, only suspicion. Malik sat in his dorm room, blinds drawn, laptop open, watching the narrative fracture in real time. He had known the backlash would come, but he hadn't realized how quickly admiration could become accusation, or how easily truth could be repainted as threat. His phone buzzed with interview requests, podcast invitations, offers to speak at conferences. At the same time, anonymous texts poured in, some supportive, others venomous. One simply read, "Stay in your lane, genius." Another, "You'll be forgotten in a week." Then his mother called. Her voice cracked before she spoke. "I saw them dragging your name through the dirt," she whispered. "You okay?" Malik stared at the floor, unsure what okay even meant anymore. "It's not real, Ma. None of that stuff matters." She hesitated. "It does when they try to take what you earned." That stuck with him. Because the smear wasn't just about headlines, it was about stripping away the legitimacy of his mind. If they could stain his name, they could steal the weight of his work. Later that evening, he returned to his inbox and found a new email waiting. No subject line, no sender, just a blank message with an attached file. He downloaded it cautiously, expecting another attack. Inside the file were two documents. One was a clean copy of his original physics paper, untouched, unedited. The other was a short typed note. "They're going after your past because they can't touch your future. Watch your back. You've embarrassed someone who never forgets." There was no signature. No clue who sent it. But Malik felt the chill in his spine. It wasn't paranoia. It was prophecy. Still, he refused to be silenced. That night, he began typing a detailed account. His version of everything. Not for a press release. Not for Harvard. But for the record. The real one. He wrote about Whitmore's treatment. The sabotage. The silence. The manipulation of systems built to protect power. It wasn't a confession. It was protection. If they came for his name, he wanted the truth preserved in his own voice. Just as he saved the draft, his inbox pinged again. The sender this time was official. From Harvard Board of Academic Integrity. Subject: request for immediate appearance. Academic misconduct. Allegation. Malik's eyes narrowed. They were escalating. He opened the message and read each line with frozen breath. The university had launched a formal inquiry into the authorship of the theoretical paper. Based on recent revelations, they were investigating whether Malik had received unauthorized assistance or misrepresented his academic contributions. They wanted him to appear before the board within 48 hours. They weren't just trying to question his work. They were trying to revoke it. Then, just as he finished reading, a second email landed in his inbox, this one with no name, just a generic Gmail address. The message was brief, brutal and chilling. You'll wish you never opened that board meeting door. Malik stared at the screen, pulse pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. They weren't trying to bury his work. They were trying to bury him. And someone on the inside was helping them do it. The investigation didn't start in a courtroom or a boardroom. It started in comment sections, group chats and editorial meetings, where Malik Griffin's name was spoken with curiosity that quickly curdled into suspicion. Once Harvard announced its inquiry, tabloids treated it as permission. If the university was questioning him, then the world felt justified doing the same. Within hours, Malik was no longer a prodigy or a symbol. He was a subject. And subjects, especially black ones, were meant to be dissected. The digging was relentless. Reporters didn't look for truth. They looked for texture. Anything that could be molded into doubt. They combed through Malik's childhood, like archaeologists hunting flaws. His middle school disciplinary file was resurrected and reframed as evidence of aggression. A failed chemistry quiz from freshman year became a headline questioning his academic consistency. A missed scholarship deadline was twisted into a narrative of irresponsibility. Nothing was too small to be bepurposed. Every imperfection was inflated until it threatened to eclipse everything he had built. Online, the tone shifted from debate to judgment. Commentators asked how someone with such a troubled background could possibly produce groundbreaking work. They used words like unlikely, suspicious, anomaly. Malik noticed how often those words appeared next to his face. Brilliance, when it came from him, was treated like an accident that required explanation. The idea that he might simply be gifted, without assistance, without manipulation, seemed unacceptable to many. The cruelty wasn't always loud. Some articles were written with feigned concern, cloaked in polite skepticism. They questioned whether Malik had been guided too heavily or benefited from behind-the-scenes mentorship. Others were more direct, accusing him of academic dishonesty without proof, suggesting that someone else must have helped him because people like him didn't just stumble into Nobel-level thinking. The subtext was constant, corrosive, and familiar. Intellect was borrowed, not owned. Malik stopped checking social media, but it followed him anyway. Screenshots were sent to his phone. Headlines were printed and slid under his door. Students whispered when he passed. Some avoided eye contact entirely, as if proximity to controversy might stain them. Others looked at him with curiosity that bordered on accusation. The campus that once ignored him now watched him like a spectacle, waiting to see if he would crack. At night, Malik lay awake replaying memories he hadn't thought about in years. The teacher who accused him of cheating because his answers were too advanced. The guidance counselor who suggested community college despite his scores. The college interviewer who asked if he thought Harvard would be too intense. None of it had been new, but seeing those moments dragged into the open, stripped of context, repackaged as proof of deception, it reopened wounds he had learned to live with, not relive. His mother called every evening now. She tried to sound calm, but Malik heard the strain. They called your aunt, she said one night. Asked about you. Asked if you were always like this. Like what? Malik asked. Though he already knew. Different. She replied quietly. Too smart for your own good. Malik closed his eyes. Even now, brilliance was being framed as a character flaw. The Harvard Board of Academic Integrity requested more documentation, drafts, notes, emails. They said it was standard procedure, but Malik recognized the imbalance immediately. He was being asked to prove innocence rather than brilliance. Every step of his intellectual journey had to be justified, catalogued, defended. Meanwhile, the professor who had publicly humiliated him and privately tried to erase his work remained protected by silence and tenure. The tabloids noticed that too, and spun it. One headline read, "Is Harvard protecting a fraud, or investigating one?" Another, "Why Malik Griffin's story doesn't add up." Each article chipped away at the narrative that had briefly empowered him. Public opinion fractured. Supporters defended him fiercely. But doubt travels faster than truth. And doubt, Malik realized, was the real weapon. Then came the unexpected pivot. A well-known academic gossip site published a short piece late one evening, barely 3 paragraphs, easily overlooked among louder attacks. It didn't mention Malik directly. Instead, it revisited an old controversy, involving Professor Harold Whitmore from nearly 15 years ago. At the time, it had gone nowhere. A graduate student had accused Whitmore of intellectual sabotage, claiming that Whitmore dismissed his research publicly, withheld recommendations, and later published a paper that echoed the student's core ideas. The student, a black man, eventually dropped out of academia entirely. The complaint was quietly settled, the records sealed. Until now, someone had leaked a fragment of the old case file. The article ended with a single unsettling line. Sources suggest this may not have been an isolated incident. Malik read it twice, heart pounding. This wasn't about him anymore. Or rather it was. But through a lens that changed everything. For the first time, the narrative wasn't asking whether Malik was a fraud. It was asking whether Whitmore had a pattern. The next morning, Malik received a message through an encrypted email service he barely remembered signing up for years ago. No subject line. No greeting. Just a sentence. I watched what they're doing to you. They did it to me first. Malik stared at the screen, breath shallow. He typed back carefully, unsure who he was speaking to, or how dangerous the truth might be. Who is this? The reply came quickly. Someone Harvard forgot. Someone Whitmore made sure you'd never hear about. Malik leaned back in his chair, the weight of it all settling into place. The attacks, the silence, the sudden aggression. This wasn't random backlash. It was damage control. And someone from the past had finally decided to stop staying buried. The next message appeared seconds later, sending a chill through Malik's chest. I have the records they buried, and I'm ready to tell the world what Whitmore really does to students like us. The email trail that Malik Griffin had stumbled into was only the surface of something deeper, rotted roots buried beneath Harvard's polished marble and gilded traditions. The anonymous messages continued with precision, each more revealing than the last. Whoever was behind them wasn't just a disillusioned former student. They had documents, screenshots, letters, time-stamped records. Whispers that were once ignored had now become receipts. And then, the name came. Dr. Ezra Wycliffe, a former Harvard theoretical physicist turned private researcher, stepped forward. The public hadn't heard his name in years, but inside academic circles, Wycliffe was once known as a rising star. Black, bold, and unflinchingly brilliant, he'd joined Harvard's postdoctoral fellowship program at age 28, only to disappear after a quiet exit no one dared question, until now. It was Wycliffe who had filed the complaint against Whitmore 15 years earlier. It was Wycliffe who had accused him of stealing core frameworks, gutting co-authorship agreements, and blackballing him from conferences when he refused to stay silent. And it was Wycliffe now who decided to speak publicly, unapologetically. His testimony was sent to every major news outlet, accompanied by a scanned document titled, Patterns of Suppression, Harvard's Silence on Racial Academic Abuse. In it, Wycliffe laid out incidents that stretched back over 2 decades. Black students penalized for minor infractions, their proposals shelved mysteriously, meetings held without them, credit rerouted, subtly but consistently. Most damning of all was a case file, described